Well, I'm a little jealous that you have Dan as your supervisor. Is that the title? And Steve, what a blessed district you are. I'm not to give him a hand. I mean, amazing person. Yeah, I mean that. So let's take. We're gonna watch a little video here for a second, and because among other things, one of the goals of I think my time with you is to help integrate into your life a dimension of silence and solitude and stillness that perhaps has not been a part of your life. And it's a part of EHS, and it's a part of what I think is needed going forward for the kingdom of God, for the church. Part of the way God comes to us. And so again, this is going to be a few testimonies from the same class, EHS course that I taught at our church in the spring, and we just grabbed some people and made some testimonies of the impact of, we kind of, in a very gentle way, move, encouraging people to get a rhythm to meet with Jesus twice a day and to integrate those couple of minutes of silence, which is very, very difficult. So here's a couple of testimonies for you in this 3-minute video.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. We will have more of our topics available.
Market rose today after Fed chair
Silence is a muscle you have to develop. It's a fundamental block that we somehow miss because of the busyness and the noise of this world that we live in.
My family growing up was not silence, it was violence. And you wanted to escape the house. I got to get out of here, this is crazy.
Between the downward spiral of things happening in my life, my silence was driven by depression.
Sitting silent for 30 seconds was extremely difficult. I could not stop my mind from wandering from one to-do list to the next.
Silence is a challenge, and it still is a challenge. I may have had a challenging day, and so my thoughts are wavering all over the place. I am too distracted.
With Christ it was really kind of like faith by works, just serving. I never confessed the things that I confessed to God during my silence. I never made that connection.
I could hear God in the silence. And that wasn't just in my relationship with God. It's something that now it affected all my relationships.
I think the real strength of rest and Sabbath and silence is that you learn to accept your limitations as a person. In the moments that you are silent, that you are not working, God is still capable to accomplish his goals. God was more concerned with me, not with what I was doing for him, but whether or not I was with him.
With silence and solitude, it was more of a relationship. It was less about me and more about God and Christ and his voice and what he's saying to me at that moment.
I found when I got alone with God and just was with him, that slowed me down enough to where I could recognize these actions in my life, where I can control them now.
Now I have a silence that drives me back to who he is and how I can be uplifted, in a way. And that is the greatest feeling. I can't imagine a life without pausing and centering myself.
The daily office gives you a system by which you could really reflect, meditate, pray, and start building that relationship with the Lord.
That's great. If you've got that daily office book, that day-by-day book, if you pull it out to page 120, page 120. I love that verse. The Lord will fight for you, Exodus 14. You need only to be still. It's a great text. And so again, we're going to begin with just 2 minutes of be still before the Lord. And again, I want to invite you to just take a nice deep breath and, quiet your heart. And again, there's a little guidelines, that Abba, Father, here I am, Lord. I actually set my alarm every morning as part of my time with God in the morning. I set it. I do 20 minutes just to kind of just be still before God, and it just anchors me. Whether I do it before Scripture or after Scripture, just to kind of offer my day to Him, and then I have these smaller silences, through the day. But to integrate that into my Pentecostal Christianity has been very transforming. And on a Sunday, we're still, we got a rock band up here, and we're a young church, and, we're dancing away and all that. But it's very powerful to add this dimension to it. Now, we're going to read a devotional here from a text from Elijah, and I'm sure you've preached from it, from 1 Kings 19. And, the text is, God appeared in fire and as an earthquake and in wind in previous ways. But now he comes to Elijah in, literally, it's a sound of sheer silence. Literally, that's the translation in Hebrew. It's not a small whisper, but they didn't know how to translate the whisper word. So they had to translate God spoke in silence, so they put whisper in there. And God's reveals himself, right, in great power. And we like power of earthquakes and wind and fire, like Moses and Job and Sinai. But I really believe one of the ways that God's coming to us in the middle of all the chaos going on in the world right now and stuff that's whirling around us, just the election alone, is silence. And that he speaks. He wants to speak to us if we'll be still before him, and gave us revelation to know how are we going to walk out following Jesus in these very turbulent times. Very turbulent times. And he may be coming in some new ways to us that we're not accustomed to, and we want to be open to that. Okay? I love this little picture of Rembrandt, and I just love it. Henry Nouwen made it famous, and I sometimes just, in this time of stillness, I'm the younger son, I want to be him, and I just want to put my head against the Father's chest and just, let him love me and feel his hands on my shoulders, and, that I'm his beloved son. That let everything go, Pete. Just let it all go. I got it. And just to rest in him. And I think letting go, I was just talking to someone about, letting go. I mean, it's one of the keys to the whole Christian life, isn't it? I mean, when we get to the end of our lives, we're going to all let go of everything. Our health, our relationships, our work, we're going to let go of all of it. And so we're practicing, we're just letting go. God's in charge, we're not. Okay, so let's begin. Let's close our eyes before the Lord. All right, let's read the scripture. Again, I'm on page 120 in the Daily Office book, page 120, and the scripture reading from 1 Kings 19. All right, together out loud. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When God appeared to Elijah after his flight from Jezebel and during his suicidal depression, he told him to stand and wait for the presence of the Lord to pass by. God did not appear in ways he had showed up in the past. God was not in the wind, as with Job, an earthquake, as with when he gave the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, or fire like the burning bush Moses saw. God revealed himself to Elijah in a gentle whisper, which can also be translated as a sound of sheer silence. The common translation of the passage does not fully capture the original Hebrew, but what could the translators do? How do you hear silence? Silence after the chaos for Elijah and for us is full of the presence of God. God spoke to Elijah out of the silence. God invites you to stand and wait like Elijah. Why? God also wants to speak to you out of the sound of sheer silence. So again, let's take our 2 minutes and let's wait on the Lord. Amen. All right, thank you. All right, so our last session here today is going to be on Sabbath, slowing down for Sabbath. So if you have your notes, you can turn to that in your packet, which is, I believe, on page 13, slowing down for Sabbath Delight. And what a nice way to end. Oh yeah, so just, I'll do my, we've been, there's really just two levels we're kind of coming at the conference. On one level, again, our formation as leaders, and then secondly is, well, how do we bring this to the church? And how do we bring this to the church? We talked about these two courses, the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality course, the EHS course, and then the Emotionally Healthy Relationships course. And really, you've had a taste of both in small ways. And so, for example, in the relationships course, which I've actually given you a taste of 3 of the skills are the tools. A community temperature reading we did last night, which is the first basic skills that kind of form a new culture. Genogram your family, you did that as well. And then explore the iceberg. So you've had a taste of a few of the skills. You can see how they're powerful, and they really do have the capacity to transform culture. I was asked a very good question yesterday, and it was a good clarifying question. They said, well, do you always like, say, if someone violates a principle, they do dirty fighting, or the way they make a complaint is just really nasty. Do you correct them in front of everybody in public? And the answer is it all depends. I mean, I only would do that in a small situation if there was a lot of safety, a lot of trust, I had a great relationship with the person. But the principle is I never want to shame anybody. So if there's any question about it possibly being shaming, no, you don't do it. Don't even go near that. You do it in private at the appropriate time. And it also depends on what position this person is in leadership, whether I'm actually I don't have time to go after everything crazy going on in our church. But leadership in particular, those are the ones I'm particularly concerned about, because the leaders are the ones creating culture. And if they don't get it, then the problem is that means the whole church is not going to get it. So we're most concerned about our leaders, from board members to staff to key volunteer leaders. So you've gotten a taste of that, and that's in the Emotionally Skills 2.0 curriculum. And then the EHS course, you've also gotten a taste of as well. And actually right now, we're going to do Discover the Rhythms of a Daily Office on Sabbath. It's one of the sessions. They're doing daily offices twice a day throughout the 8 weeks, and with silence kind of built into it. But one session is actually dedicated to Sabbath, and this whole, so the idea of rhythms, that's what we're after here. Again, the core of the course is we want to get people having a first-hand relationship with Jesus. That's the heart of it. And so that's weaves through both courses. And it is every evaluation feedback sheet and every small group table leader will tell you the same thing. It is the hardest part of the course, because most people in our churches are not spending time with Jesus. They're spending time with Jesus at church and in prayer meetings and in small groups. But that's pretty much it. And it's alarming when you find out. I didn't believe it until I started really pressing into people and asking. And once I started pressing in and asking, I was so alarmed. I thought it was everybody else's church. You know how it is. And then I thought it was our church too. And they're hard questions to ask, because you find out that, oh my gosh, no wonder we are not maturing spiritually as a whole body, and because it's got to flow with Jesus. So again, but the Emotionally Leader book is the leadership book, and so I was asked a couple of times. What I recommend to people is that the leader book, that you talk about it like as your, I don't know, however your church, whoever your primary leadership is, whether it's your board or whether you have staff or your core leadership, because this is very pointed. This is like going right after the leader, about how we have a missing piece of our leadership formation that we've got to address. And so that's that level. But the other Emotionally Spirituality course and the 8 Skill course, that's something you slowly begin to breathe into your church. But I found, and Paul and I had a discussion about it yesterday, this is what I recommend on that leadership level, because once people see this, they're actually convinced we have got to do something, starting with me, because we always want to start with the leadership. We lead, as goes the leader, so goes the church. That's the principle here. So right now, we've tasted Face Your Shadow, and we've tasted Lead Out of Your Marriage or Singleness, and now we're going to go into really practice Sabbath Delight. But I'm going to touch on slowing down for loving union, okay, as well. So, all right, here we go, session 4 here. So there's a danger of leading without Jesus. Do you know that you can lead without Jesus? I know, I've done it. Especially when you've been around a while. You can put together a sermon. You've done that. Opening illustration, a couple of points, a couple of illustrations, throw a little vulnerability in there so you can connect with people. It's sad, people tell me, hey, throw some vulnerability and weakness in there, so people know that you're human. Kind of like a sermon aid. Not that we're broken and vulnerable, but just throw it in to make believe that we are and that we're like one of them. And and you put together the sermon, and people will get blessed, and you're thinking, this is good. It's all good. And people are coming to Christ. And you think, that's good too. It's all good. And church can be growing. That's good too. And, I tell the story that I think I had to change all the details in it. But this one was pastor that was, the church had a couple thousand people, and it grew to like 6,000 people. But the entire time he was having an affair. And the church was growing. I want you to think about it. People coming to Christ, built a building. Everything's on, quote, on fire. And he actually preached a series on marriage and family. And it all came out. And so you've got to make a clarity distinction that you can lead without Jesus. And so the fact that the thing is growing doesn't mean you're in loving union with Jesus. So Jesus knew this, and so in Matthew 7:21, he talked about it at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Now, I want you to notice, they're prophesying, bringing the word of the Lord to people, freeing people with a prophetic word. Prophetic words are powerful. They've really served me over my years. I love prophetic words. We're to eagerly seek the gift of prophecy. And then they're driving out demons. That's really helping people. Goodness. And then they're doing miracles. People getting healed and miracles, arms lengthened, hearts healed. These are all incredibly good things. And so their church is on fire. It's doing tremendous. And Jesus says, I never knew you. Now, how can that be? He knows everything. He knows the hairs on our head. But he says, I don't know you. And what he's referring to, that's the word for intimacy. Genesis 1 and 2, Adam knew Eve. It's the word for, loving union. In other words, you've not let me in. I don't have access inside of you. You're not opening up. Revelation 3:20, I stand at the door and I knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, that, as you know, it's written to Christians. And he goes on, you're not surrendering your will to me and giving me access to fill your life with my spirit, but you're doing all these works for me. And we see the same story here in the sons of Sceva in Acts 19. I love this story because you remember the story, these 7 sons of Sceva, Jewish high chief priests, they're casting. They see Paul driving out demons. They're like, I want to drive out those. I want to do like Paul's doing, driving out demons in Ephesus, and big crowds are coming. Like, I want to be like Paul. So they're doing it. In the name, they got the formula down. In the name of Jesus, casting out demons. And then one day the evil spirit answers them, Jesus I know and Paul I know, but who are you? Like, in other words, you're doing the works of Jesus, like Paul is, but you don't have the relationship of loving union with Jesus that Paul has. But yet you're doing the same thing as Paul. And the man who had the evil spirit jumped on them and overpowered them all. He gave them such a beating, they ran out of the house naked and bleeding. Wow. Wow. I've run out of the house naked and bleeding a couple times. That's why you can grow the ministry beyond your inner life and destroy yourself. Because you do not have the life to support what you're engaged in. You're in a level of warfare and responsibility in God that requires an inner life of loving union with Jesus that you've not taken the time and discipline to actually invest in. And then you find yourself on ice. I know. That's why I get, we read about scandals. I've been in this a long time. I've been reading about scandals now for 40 years. Like you always think, oh, it's just a season, It's just a bad season. We're in these things are breaking out. And you realize this is not a season. This is the norm. This is like just normal evangelicalism. It's just kind of like constant. And part of it is because we've been able to separate, that I can lead without this loving union with Jesus. That's why it's called slowing down for loving union. And so, I just define loving union is to allow Jesus and his will full access in your life in a posture of attentiveness, openness, and surrender. That's kind of my little definition. In other words, you can have a quiet time and read the Bible and pray and not let Jesus in. The Pharisees did that. They prayed 3 times a day or 5 times a day. They read the Bible. They memorized the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And it's just you can be in worship and it's be all good feelings because you're in worship for the good feeling to be lifted in your faith, but you're actually not surrendering your will and your life to Jesus. It's very subtle, isn't it? It's all motivation. Only God knows. But you can kind of get into a routine where it's just kind of mechanical. It's a tremendous danger. And so this is why this slowing down our lives, that's what I love about silence. See, for me, a turning point for me in 2003 was when I really did get this slow down, contemplative, this kind of the riches of monasticism. It got me into history and just looking at this whole tradition of silence and solitude. Someone brought up the question yesterday that someone in the church is really against silence because they believe it's New Age and all that, and they're really uptight. And you really, you just got to say to them in a really nice way, like, you are super wrong. Okay, like you are just so off base about understanding theology, history. You're in total reaction mode, and you can't say it like that, but you have to correct these folks. And for them to threaten you and exercise power in the church, to shut down silence and solitude, is so out of order. And we're God's shepherds and sheep, and we're called to equip and teach and train people. And it's just not, people think some, and they'll threaten you, and I'll leave the church, and whatever. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm like, they'll quote some internet article or something, that you're liberal, and you're this, and this, and you're like, oh my God, and now I'm being accused, and so you just cave in. And thus we go right back to normal, whatever we're doing, and silence and stillness. I'll just be personal right now. Prior to this, in 2003, most of my praying was, I didn't say it this way, oh God, my will be done. I was like, I need you to do this, Lord, for your sake. Like, I need you to get me a staff that's a rock, okay, that can live in Queens, that can handle the pressure, that wife will not say, I can't live here anymore, I'm moving to Iowa, okay? I need you, God, to bring somebody now who will stay here and do this multiracial thing and all that. And Lord, I need you to straighten out so-and-so over there who's not using their gifts because I'm exhausted doing too much, And Lord, you know what? I need that building. Bring us a millionaire, oh Father, please. Just one person. God, make a way, change. I'm like, so much of it is like, I got these goals and I need the Lord to like make it happen. So, it's like Martha in Luke 10, Lord, he says that, Lord, Mary, tell her to help me. And so, but there really was when I entered into integrating much more silence and solitude in my spiritual life, it changed my prayer life because I became much more, Lord, I want your will today. I actually want your will for this church, whatever it might be. It's nothing, look, I'm letting go of my will, which is really hard to do, and I want your will. So I find out the reason I like to pause or have these short daily offices or midday prayer and evening prayer is because by midday, I'm doing my will. Like I do God's work my way. And it's one of the big gifts is it corrects me. I say, okay, Lord, your will. And the Lord says, Pete, why are you driving that meeting? Why are you bringing such anxiety to that room? Like it's got to be done tomorrow. There's no rush. Like relax. Like get a life, And yes, Lord, And I'm serious. So like my midday prayer, I usually read Psalms and I pray the Our Father. But silence is the core for me. I got to settle down and say, and just be before Him and say, yes, Lord, not my will. Would your will be done through me today? I'm waiting on you for that. And so really, it just been able to help me relax a lot more and enjoy church a lot more. And I'm not as anxious as I am. Just like, because I really don't want my will. It doesn't work. And then I got to go back and start all over again anyway. And so, you know, I think, you know, we have and I hope you've been picking this up, this word compartmentalization, that we have a compartmentalized spirituality. You know, a lot of pastors say to me, I went on vacation, I feel so far from Jesus. You say, well, why do you feel so far from Jesus? Because I just wasn't thinking about God, because for them thinking about God is work. Do you understand? And so it got kind of all confused. And, you know, all of life belongs to God. My Sabbaths, my days off, my vacations, and it's all God. Sexuality, marriage, single, it's all God. And, you know, we have chaotic rhythms. I mean, it's so chaotic, right? I mean, I do Twitter, I do blogging and Facebook, I'm in all that. But that just adds to the chaos. I'm surprised, I went for a long walk yesterday, how much traffic you've got out here. I was like, oh my gosh, it's chaotic out here in Iowa too, you know, and you know, here we are, you know, and it's stressful. So, you know, let's talk about Sabbath. And now, the reason we're going to talk about Sabbath is, practicing Sabbath is because, you know, if I had to pick one thing to help people slow down, how are we going to slow people down? How am I going to help you slow down and me slow down? And there's so many spiritual practices that we could talk about. This is the one that I would start with. This is the starting point. I have yet to meet a person with a good rhythm in their lives as a leader, a good sense of good pace of leadership, who does not Sabbath. I've yet to meet anybody, because Sabbath is such a core formation discipline. So when we talk about the Sabbath thing, now let me just say at the outset, you know, this is the way secular rhythm is. We work, then we go on vacation because we're exhausted. Then we work, we go on vacation again. The sacred rhythm, the biblical rhythm is we Sabbath and we work, we Sabbath and we work. That's biblical. That's biblical. That's how we're to think of life: Sabbath and work. And so now Sabbath is, and we got to cut this straight, because there's a lot of, you know, like anything else, any powerful teaching ends up on extremes. We're not talking about a new legalism. You're not saved by Sabbath. We're saved by Jesus. You're not saved by prayer, you're saved by Jesus. You're not saved by Bible study, you're saved by Jesus. But if you're not reading the Bible and you're not praying, you're probably not growing very much. All right? But Sabbath is a core spiritual discipline. It's not a moderate one. It's a big one. Like, it's up there with prayer and Bible study and worship and fellowship and local. It's up there. We have it. So the other extreme is what I was taught in seminary, which no one ever talked about, but this was the implication, was licentiousness, which basically means Sabbath is irrelevant. Just don't think about it. Jesus is our Sabbath rest. You know, come to me all you are weary and heavy laden. We're headed for an eternal Sabbath rest. And so forget it. Just don't think about it. And so we work 7 days a week. And we have these days off. And so we just completely get rid of it. And so what I want to strongly challenge you is that Sabbath is a spiritual formation discipline. Doesn't save us. God's not mad at you if you don't Sabbath. But it's a spiritual formation practice. And it's a core one. Eugene Peterson has written books on this thing. And I encourage you to read up on it. And if you ever notice how many times Jesus is healing on the Sabbath, he's always healing on the Sabbath. And then people want to kill him. They're so angry at him. And like I used to always say, Jesus, just heal on Tuesday. Just heal on Wednesday. Don't do it on the Sabbath. They're right there. They're going to be so angry at you, But he always heals on the Sabbath. And because he's restoring it to its original intention, which is not legalism, which is not a heavy yoke. He says, you were not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for you. Mark 2:27, it was a gift to receive. The Pharisees made it into a works righteousness, a badge of honor. They destroyed it. But yet Jesus didn't throw it out completely either. But he brought it back to its original purpose, which was freedom for us, and we'll talk about in a second how we were created. So I want you to notice there's 10 commandments. Now, and the fourth is the longest commandment, the Sabbath commandment. And I just kind of sit with it for a minute, and every Orthodox Jew, rabbi would tell you that if you don't keep the fourth commandment, you can't keep the other 9. And I thought that was so foolish when I first heard it. But I actually get it now. But the fact that it's up there are the 10 Commandments, I mean, all right, Jesus may have fulfilled our Sabbath, but, it's got some weight to it. It is in there. There's not 9, there are 10 Commandments. And because you see, the Sabbath idea is something bigger than just us getting a rest. And let me just show you in Deuteronomy 5 when he gives a Sabbath command. Let me just read it to you. He says, "Observe the Sabbath day. The seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God." Okay, I understand. See, it's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. It's not a day off. Okay, Eugene Peterson calls a day off a bastard Sabbath because it looks like a Sabbath, but it's not. Because a Sabbath is to the Lord our God. A Sabbath is filled with God. A day off is just you having a day off. It's for you. Sabbath is deeper than that. It's to the Lord our God. On that day you shall not do any work, neither you nor your servant or daughter. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Now, he reminds them in the Deuteronomy account of the Sabbath commandment that you were slaves in Egypt. Now, understand, for 400 plus years, they were under Pharaoh. They worked 7 days a week. Could you imagine? That means, imagine your parents and our great-great-great-grandparents. Everybody's been a slave since the year, this is 2016, since 1616? Is that the right date? Yeah, 1616, that we have been all slaves, working 7 days a week. Because our entire worth and value is in what we do. If you don't produce as a slave, well, Pharaoh will kill you. There's no reason for you to be alive. Because you are what you do. And actually, it's so funny because that's our culture. And you are what you do. If you don't, that's why, those with mental challenges and now euthanasia is now an issue, and, Alzheimer's. Well, why live? What are you producing? And we abort babies, and I mean, the whole culture is you are what you do. We treat people who produce a lot differently than those who don't. And but they were slaves for 400 years, and Pharaoh was considered a god. He was divine. Do you understand that Pharaoh was worshipped? And so when Moses comes up against Pharaoh in Exodus 3 and 4, he's coming against a false god. I mean, talk about differentiation. And so you understand, behind Egypt are demonic powers that enslaved God's people. That when we Sabbath, we are resisting powers and principalities that define you by your work, that says you are what you produce, you are what you do. And it is a spiritual warfare issue. It's big what's going on here with regards to Sabbath. It's about freedom. Only free people can Sabbath. Slaves don't Sabbath. Slaves work every day because they have to. Now, for most of us, our Sabbath is not just the media and the culture. Pharaoh lives inside of us. I got to go. I got to work. My adrenaline, I can't stop. And we just keep working like slaves. But you see, God freed us from slavery. And for the Israelites, it was very hard for them to learn Sabbath. You read, first 5 books of the Old Testament, they struggled with Sabbath. You don't just get it overnight. So here's the 4 qualities of Sabbath. So I started experimenting with Sabbath in 1996, and 2003 I just read everything on Sabbath. I said, I got to figure this thing out, and really kind of cemented it as a spiritual discipline in my own life, and then eventually brought it to our church. And I said, how do we create, how do we distill the biblical teaching on Sabbath to some principles, because it's going to apply differently to different people. And so I ended up with these 4 principles of how do you construct a 24-hour period as a Sabbath here in the New Covenant. And I ended up with 4 qualities. We stop, rest, delight, and contemplate God. Those are the 4 words. For a 24-hour period. Sabbath in the Bible is a 24-hour period. So we'll take each one, one at a time. But those are the key 4 words I want you to think about, because you have to structure your Sabbath. And these 4 words are very helpful. So let me expound on them in a bit. First, we stop. Now, things are happening around us at lightning speed. Lightning speed. Now, this is the book by Robert Swenson. Some of you may know him. He's written a book called Margin, and this comes out of one of his books about the rate of change. He analyzes the rate of change through all of recorded human history. And he notes that the last 30 years have been so much change that it makes the rest of human history look like a flat line. So that's how much is going on around. There's so much to keep up with. It's dizzying. And then, I have FOMO, fear of missing out. I don't want to be left behind. I mean, if you're my age at 60, we have to be crossing cultures constantly. I mean, our lead pastor at New Life Fellowship was 37. He's already old. Like, he's already out of touch with the culture of 20s. Like, he's got to work hard to enter that world now. I mean, that's how quickly things are changing. So we're constantly having to, cross cultures of generations. It's happening so quickly. And so how do I stop? And so the core of this thing of stop, you see, in the first Sabbath, God, Genesis 2, he stops. He creates the world in 6 days, and then he Sabbaths to the Lord. He Sabbaths. He stops. He ceases. And so we are invited as well to actually stop our work, paid and unpaid, and to actually trust God. Whew. That's hard. In other words, you are a creature, not the creator. You are not God. You are not in charge. And God is in charge, and he's building the kingdom of God. He's running the world. That's why when Jesus healed on the Sabbath in John 5, he says, my Father is working to this very hour, and I too am working. And then they pick up stones to stone him for blasphemy. Because for the Jews, they understood that the only one who works on Sabbath is God. Because God is always keeping the galaxies moving, the stars and the sun. People are dying, babies are being born. God works because he's God, but we stop and we trust and we submit and we surrender and we let go on Sabbath. We trust God. One of my favorite verses in all the Bible is John 6:28. They ask Jesus, what must we do to do the works God requires? Mercy, justice, plant churches, whatever it might be. What's the works that God requires? And Jesus says, this is the work, singular. This is the work of God, to trust in the one he has sent. Our number one work for all of us in this room, regardless of our position, is to trust Jesus. Every day, we're trusting Jesus, and we follow him wherever he goes, even though it makes no sense. We're letting go. We're not in charge. That's very difficult when you're running the church, right? Because we aren't. We're in charge under him. But we stop because all of our goals and to-do lists, we will not finish them, ever. Like I have a to-do list every week. I've got my goals and all that. I never reach them. Do you? It's always unfinished. We will die with all kinds of unfinished lists and goals. In fact, when you die, you will stop. And you're going to find out God's doing just fine without you. That's the amazing thing. He's doing fine. Church is not going to stop. Kingdom of God's not going to stop. It's going to keep going on in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, New York. And it's been going on for centuries that way. God's going to do just fine. And so every Sabbath, we're invited to taste eternity and stop. And let go for 24 hours. And then, we rest. Oh yeah, I like this. You know why we can stop? Because Jesus' wine never runs out. He's the feast. And so we can rest. Because you know what? Our wine always runs out. His doesn't. So we trust him. And because we're always under-resourced, aren't we? We don't have enough time. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough workers. We don't have enough anything. But we just bring our few loaves and fishes and we trust them. Now, that's the most challenging part of being a leader, isn't it? So secondly, we rest. And again, I could go on for hours about each of these. There's a whole lot of biblical teaching around it and the Hebrew words and in Scripture. But I'm just going to give a quick summary. And actually, on our website's got a lot of free sermons on this stuff. And go take a look at them, and get a good theology for this because it's very important. And you want to be able to bring it to people with some clarity. But this is how most of us do our jobs. It's just hard. That's Sisyphus from Greek mythology. We got a goal. We push that rock up, and then we got the story here is he never enjoys and delights in his work. That's the curse. It's just slavery. And for many of us, and I know what it's like. It's like you reach a goal, and it's like, darn. I never forget we bought our building, and a quarter of an acre for $6.5 million. All right. And the building needed $3 to $4 million worth of work. quarter of an acre, all right? It takes 45 minutes to find a parking space to come to church at New Life, all right? So obviously the comfortable people are not coming. We're still praying for a rich person to show up, all right? Just, oh God, somebody from the suburbs that will come with the big pocketbook, but they're not going to look for a parking space, you know. What am I going to do? But I lost my train of thought. Oh, I know. We bought the building, and it was 5 years of work, and you know what it's like, stewardship campaigns, and oh God, I was so exhausted when it was over. I just said, God, just take me home. I got in the building, I did my part, let some other guy take it from here, you know. And I'll never forget it. We sat there, and we realized, oh no, you know, now we have to we have to fill this building. You know, now we've got to figure out who's doing maintenance, who's doing security. Now all of a sudden we had another hill, and immediately we had to, it was an incredible picture for me of that fact of it just never ends. It's just, the work is constant. And so it can really feel like this. And so God invites us every week to Sabbath. To stop and to rest. And, you know, not this, just like let it go, you know, and do this, you know. You know? Or if you're a cat lover, you do that. I like that. Or you do that if you're a polar bear, you know. Or this is my best one yet. You do that. You know? Just let it all go. Just rest. He's in charge. He's got it. And so we rest from things. You know, there's a store. Any of you buy electronics from B&H in Manhattan? It's a big electronics store. They if you're like in sound systems and all that, they're after Amazon. They're the biggest in the United States. B&H Electronics. It's run by Hasidic Jews, right in the center of Manhattan, and they close Friday at 1 o'clock for their Sabbath, which is Friday night to Saturday night, and they don't open until Sunday. And they lose millions of dollars every year. They're on a main thoroughfare, and I was there once on a Friday. And I went there to buy something, and here I am. I'm trying to give them my money. And the gate came down. It was like 12:30, 1 o'clock on Friday. I'm like, what are you doing? I got money I want to spend in there. You know, they don't care. It's Sabbath. They're closing shop. They got to get themselves ready. They got to go back to Brooklyn, New York, which is leave Manhattan. They got to get ready for Sabbath. And they don't care about the money. They're just they're just stopping. And so the New York Times did an article on them. Well, I'm sorry, not New York Times. A newspaper did an article on them because they were closed on Black Friday, the biggest shopping day of the year. And they said, how can you close on Black Friday? And the guy said, well, it's easy. You know, we report to a higher power. We report to a higher power, and that's it. And I thought to myself, these guys have more faith than my people, because they got to work extra so they can go to Disney World for vacation. So they're going to miss church the next 6 months because they don't work overtime at the subway. I mean, I'm thinking that's the reality of the people in my church. And I thought to myself, something's wrong here. But it's a powerful testimony of the fact that and Jews will tell you, we don't keep the Sabbath. Sabbath keeps the Jews. Jews have been keeping Sabbath for 3,500 years, and they may have gotten some things wrong, but they got some things right. And even in concentration camp, the Orthodox Jews kept Sabbath because they wanted the Nazis to know that you don't own us. We belong to God in its purest sense. And so we rest from, even on their website, if you go to the B&H website, today is Wednesday? So go to it like Friday or Saturday. Go to their website, B&H, and it'll say there, you cannot make an order on their Sabbath. You have to, and it'll tell you what time. You can peruse the website, but you cannot make an order. After Sabbath, it's available. You can make an order. And now, it's a bit legalistic, obviously, but I think it's just amazing point. So we rest from things like our work. So all of our work, paid work and unpaid work. So I have a lot of unpaid work, like you do. I got to pay my bills. I got to clean the house. Got to fix the car. I'm not really into like chores around the house. I mean, that's work, and laundry's work, and so that unpaid work, I'm resting from that too. And of course, New Life Fellowship and all that, and emotionally spirituality and writing, all that. I mean, that's work. I rest from physical exhaustion. I say taking a nap, but I'm not. Many of us are tired. Rest from hurry. not rushing anywhere on Sabbath. There's no goals that we're trying to accomplish on Sabbath. That's the point. I'm Sabbathing. I have any goals. So now I'm able to go down the street and say hi to my barber. In our neighborhood, you walk to the stores. It's one thing nice about New York. There are advantages. You don't need a car. You go over so you walk. And greeting neighbors and washing my hands, tasting food. It's amazing. We talk about Sabbath driving. Jerry and I, we drive on the right side of the road. But try not to multitask. Do one thing at a time. Not in the car. I'm not, listening to a tape, making notes on my sermon, eating breakfast, listening. I'm not doing 9 things at once. Driving the car, just like one thing at a time. It's amazing. Just because you're not trying to do 9 things. It's Sabbath. I'm not trying to catch up on errands. I may do an errand or two, but it's not my catch-up day. Most of us, our day off is a catch-up day on all the work of life that we didn't get done during the week because we were working too much and thinking about it too much. Technology, machines, and just a lot of folks just rest from. I'll go on my phone. I will go on the internet, but nothing related to work. In other words, I'm not answering emails. I cannot look at an email on Sabbath because it just takes one email and then and your mind's going and Sabbath is shot, right? And so, technology, machines, and all that. So again, you can add to the list, but you get the idea. I'm resting on Sabbath. But the key word for Sabbath is the third word. Is the word delight. That is, that is like the key word because on the first Sabbath, God looks at the creation and it says, He pronounces, it is very good. It is beautiful. It's wonderful. He beams with delight. And so delight was built into the fabric of the first Sabbath. And we are to enjoy and delight in the many, many good gifts of God that come from His hand. And the Lord invites us to enjoy His creation and to do things that delight us and give us rest, replenish our soil. Think of your life as soil. And remember, every 7th year was a Sabbath, was a year of sabbatical rest for the soil. They were told to not work the soil. Trust God that He'll give you 2 years of crops on that 7th year. He'll take care of it. And of course, they didn't always do it because if you kept working the soil, you're raping the soil. But when you let that soil lie fallow, God's, nature through God is replenishing that soil with nutrients for the future. In the same way, your soil, the image of God in you was created for a rhythm of work and Sabbath. You were not created to work 7 days a week. It's violent to your soul, and like me, you felt it. You're giving out way too much, and it's like, this is sucking something out of me that I don't even have right now, and you're angry. And there's no compassion because you feel like I felt this so often. I said, the pastorate is demanding from me something I don't have anymore. But part of it was the way I was functioning as a pastor. The yoke was heavy and hard. But we were created, friends, for a rhythm where we stop, we rest, and then we have delight. Just delight of enjoying life. So Jerry and I think about our Sabbath. You got to plan for Sabbath. What are we going to do for Sabbath? And so, we love nature. We live in New York, so getting out of New York is a high priority for us. Where there's beauty, we love ocean, we love water, we love hiking, we love nature. I love museums, I love bookstores, I love music, but I'm looking for things. We love silence, we love reading books. We just love delighting. We love our children, we're present with people. You don't hang around people that drain you on Sabbath, all right? Don't tell them. That's the reason you don't want to spend time with them. But it's Sabbath, so you want to hang around people that give you life, friendships, etc. So, I had a Jewish rabbi say to me once, he says, what is with you Christians? Like, why are Christians, he says, especially Protestants, you seem so hung up on joy. And he goes, it's like, and sex. He wrote the 2 things. And he says, it seems like you guys start in Genesis 3. But do you guys know that Genesis 1 and 2 come before Genesis 3? And I was like, it's true. Like, we start with the fall. Everything's like sin and temptation, and like, gosh, if you enjoy yourself, it'll lead you. Who knows where it'll take you, to go to a movie, But like the Jews, you look at their culture and history. There's a lot. There's dancing. There's joy. There's, they really do get it. So on Sabbath, you're looking for things. You're saying, what gives me joy and delight? Now, what's sad for many of us, we don't know what gives us joy and delight because our whole life is work. So we got to really think about it and cultivate actually hobbies and things that we enjoy and figure that out. And that's why this intersects with emotional health, because you see, if your family didn't do play and your family didn't do delight, then it's going to be really hard for you to do it. Like Sabbath was really hard for me because my family, all we did was work. Your value is in your work, so you work. So for me to stop and rest and delight, I felt so guilty. It's like I have to kill myself to earn the right to rest or earn the right to have delight. So I've got to suffer a lot so God can give me this permission. What a God. And I realized that was coming out of my family of origin script. And so it was very liberating for me to start to learn. Now, Jerry was much better at it. Some of you are going to have a really hard time with it. Really hard. This is like getting off crack. Your body is going to demand to work 7 days. At least be thinking about it all day long. Because you just can't stop. And I've had pastors say to me, I just can't. The guilt is so great if I'm not productive. And so really see yourself as a heroin crack addict to activity and doing. And God is calling you to freedom and to a life of rhythm. Rhythms in your days with the offices and some silence, and rhythms in your week with Sabbath. A rhythmic life. And then we model that for the church. And then lastly, the word contemplation. And the word contemplation is, all that means is seeing the invisible in the visible. In other words, all of life is the visible God in creation, right? It's all these gifts of God. Food, creation, beauty, people. But we actually are very aware that these are coming from the hand of God. So, see, I can be at the ocean. My mother-in-law lives at the ocean. We go to the ocean a lot. And I love the ocean. I just love the ocean. And I can look at the ocean and see the power of God, the grandeur of God, the mountains. Oh my gosh, But you can go. I love camping too. You go camping, and you're in the woods and in nature. You can see God in it, right? His handiwork. Or you can just go to nature because you love it. Do you understand? But Sabbath is you're seeing God, His handiwork. And so you're coming at it so differently. Play and beauty we are the ones leading the culture in delight. Sadly, we equate delight with sin. And so we don't want to go near that. No, we want to redeem delight. It belongs to God. And we want to engage in it. And just, rabbis, they would talk about if you're married, how many times you should make a love on Sabbath. Yeah, they would talk about that. There's like Sabbath delight. So it's quite funny to read it. You go into their right. They got the Mishnah, thousands of pages on Sabbath, how to do Sabbath. And so the question is, what will I stop doing? What will I start doing? And so again, you don't have to keep Sabbath. You don't have to. You get to keep it. You get to keep Sabbath. All right, it's a privilege and it's a gift. Mark 2:27, you were not made the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for you. And legalism, perfectionism kills Sabbath. Did I get it right? Did I do it? Jerry and I once went, let's try gardening. In New York, you have a little backyard, it's very small. So we had a couple plants. Let's just try this. And before we know it, we were like pulling out weeds and like we looked at each other after about 2 hours and we said, this is totally unenjoyable. Like we got crazy trying to yard work and we laughed, we stopped, Or we made a decision, let's go here for Sabbath, go apple picking, and then we went at a time of the day, we live in traffic. We got caught in a major traffic jam and we said, never again. So we have to be very strategic on thinking about, that's why the Jews prepare for Sabbath. At a certain time, they take some hours to get ready for Sabbath because you just can't walk into it because you won't know what you're doing. And You got to create a container. And so you don't be legal. Did I get it right? No, the point is it's trial and error. You got to figure out what works for you. And I'll close with this thought. This one rabbi, Heschel, said this: every Sabbath you taste eternal life. In a sense, every Sabbath you taste your death. It's like you died. You stopped all your work. You're resting now. You're delighting and you're contemplating God. It's like you're dead. And he says, if you don't enjoy and relish the taste of eternal life on Sabbath, what makes you think you're going to relish it and love it when you see him face to face? We are headed for an eternal Sabbath. Every earthly Sabbath, we are tasting heaven. And it really is a taste. And I have found that when people enter Sabbath, leaders, legalism, in my experience, now it's been the last 13 years, I've yet to experience a pastor who entered into it properly, theologically, with a nice, good, guardrails, biblically, who's ever said, it's legalism. I have to do it. They've always said, how did I ever, like we say, all of our staff say, how did we ever live without this? Oh my gosh, how did we ever survive? And so in our staff team, if you don't Sabbath, we'll fire you. We'll fire you. I mean, things happen, but if you're not regularly Sabbathing and a rhythm in your life, you cannot be on our staff team because you're a bad model for the church. If we can't slow down and trust Jesus, how can we ask our people to slow down and trust Jesus? It's like, right, we tithe and give. We say God comes through. God shows up. He'll provide. Tithe. Give to him, even if you're tight, right? And he does. Well, same thing. Slow down to be with Jesus. Trust him. He'll get it done. It'll all work out, but we can't trust them to do it. Well, how are we going to ask them to trust? We can preach about slowing down, but the truth is they'll never slow down. The culture will just sweep everybody away. Okay, all right, so let's do this. We got a few minutes. Let me just take a couple questions on Sabbath, and then we're going to close. I wanted to just introduce this to you because I know this is a big discipline. It's a big spiritual formation practice. But let me just take a couple of questions. Or you know what? We have 10 minutes. Let me do some FAQs that come up all the time. All right? On Sabbath. What do I do with my small children? Get rid of them. Just get rid of them. Change your own diaper. Your spouse drains you, get rid of him too. You're not a delight. Now listen, again, let's not get legalistic here, So you have to be very creative when you have small children. Just like if you have an aging parent. And so my wife and I, when our kids were small, we would take turns sometimes. Okay, Jerry, you got the morning. I need the afternoon. Or we'd hire babysitters. Or, we spent some money, or we teamed up with other families and were very intentional about, because then the kids can play with each other and we're enjoying ourselves. But you got to really be creative when you have small children. We get our parents. My parents were alive. We work on parenting stuff, but you got to think it through. Our kids did not play all these sports either. I don't know about Iowa. Everybody's crazy in East Coast about kids got to be on travel team to make it to the whatever, professional sports, scholarship, who knows? But we said to our daughter, we had one daughter very gifted in soccer, we said, you're going to be in one league, the local league, and that's it. We're not doing travel. We're not traveling to other states. We're just not doing it. So our Sabbath is, we do Friday night to Saturday night. And the reason we do that is because our church got big enough, I stopped doing weddings other people doing weddings. So that was significant, and that was the best day for us. Staff take different days, but the point is you have a regular day and you try to stick with it. Now I'd say 2 or 3 times a year we have to switch it for events, but we try not to. We try to stay as faithful as we can to the same day. But for us, our bodies have that rhythm. You know what I'm saying? Your body gets wired for it, and you really feel it. To miss it, it does feel violent. Paul says in Romans 14, he talks about what day, and idolatrous food and sacred days. And he basically says every day is a lie in New Covenant. So just for us, we can't do Saturday. We can't do Sundays. We're working. So it's a work day for us. For most of our people in our churches, Sundays is great. They can do all day Sunday. They can do Saturday night, 6 o'clock, till Sunday night, 6 o'clock, or 7 o'clock or something. Because some people are executives or they have high-level jobs. They got to prepare on Sunday nights to go into work on Monday. Some people. But they got worship built into it. So it's fantastic for folks in our churches. But for us, if Monday's your day off, my recommendation is turn Monday into a Sabbath. Turn your day off and start making it a Sabbath. That's the easiest step for you. Say, okay, sit down, whether you're single or married, say, okay, now how can I stop? Okay, that means I'm not, if you're a student, I've had grad students, I say your work is study. So that means on Sabbath, you don't study. My kids love that when they're in high school and junior high. Even my college student daughter, when she's in college, or a senior in college, it's Sabbath. She's not studying. She's got it. She was blessed because she was young. I have 4 daughters, but my youngest one really got it because she was young enough that so you have to make it fun for them on Sabbath. If you have small kids, you don't want them ever to associate Sabbath with no, don't do that, no TV, no this, and that's like the contradiction for them. So you want to think, how can we make this a great day for them? Give them candy, spoil them. You want them to associate Sabbath with joy. That's the key. I had a friend who went to Israel. She spent some time there, and she says, Pete, every Sabbath is like a Thanksgiving meal. It's like a major party event. And she goes, when kids come out of school, she was sitting on a park bench, and they came out, singing the song in Hebrew and dancing. And she says, what are they doing? She goes, they're saying, it's Sabbath, it's Sabbath. Because they were so excited to go into Sabbath. Could you imagine? They just loved it. So if you got small kids, you're very blessed. If you're unemployed, if you're retired, same thing. You need a Sabbath. You need some kind of a rhythm in your life to go with it. What's another any other frequently asked questions? Yes. If you're bivocational, it's really hard, isn't it? So what are you going to do? It all depends on what kind of job do you have, right? What's the nature of your job? In terms of, do you have freedom to make phone calls and do some work at your job? Or is it, highly intense, and then you're also now pastoring? So you've got to figure this out because you're not 2 people. So it may be you need to make sure you move to team preaching. Preaching's a heavy load because you got to go into this thing saying, I can't be preaching a sermon every week because that kills my Saturday or whatever. I don't know your family situation, but you've got to work very hard if you're going to be able to sustain that long term because it's not human to work an 80-hour week. It's slavery. And God's not calling that. I know some successful bivocational people. Most of them who are successful, I think, have jobs that have a lot of flexibility to it. And they've been able to build that church with some team built in that they're not, in a sense, in a solo thing. They went into it very aware that I cannot be the administrator, the preacher, the small group coordinator, leader. It's not sustainable. So again, we cannot give what we do not possess, and so we go into that with some kind of a structure. Was there any other questions? Yes, back there.
So we have an all-volunteer worship team that have various work schedules, night, day, all Monday through Friday, and they typically will rehearse for 2 or 3 hours on Saturday, and then rehearse a little bit before service and lead Sunday worship service.
How's that work?
Excuse me?
Yeah, it's great. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
So how do I speak to them about Sabbath to encourage them that they can actually make this work in their life and still, because there's no time that the full worship team can meet apart from sometime on the weekend.
Yes.
And they're working all the rest of the time.
Great question. And so again, let's define I trust, they're not paid, these folks, right? They got jobs. Yeah, volunteers, children's workers, worship team, everybody, right? Most of the church is 99% volunteers. So again, let's distinguish. Their work is not church. Their work is I'm a carpenter, I'm a social worker, I'm a teacher, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, whatever it might be. That's their vocational work. So their serving at church is not work, and hopefully it's a joy to them. And so, people volunteer at our church like crazy. We had 3 services, a lot going on Sundays. And our elders are up there praying for people, and everyone's doing stuff. But what we are cautious about, except for the worship team, people on that worship team generally love being on that worship team. I mean, so they're there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're there 3 services, they're leaving at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But you know what? They're like, thank you, because they love it. Now, children's church, a little more laborious. It is a tougher job. And so very few people will find it joyful to be there from 8 a.m. until 2 in the afternoon. So, we have 1 or 2 that just love it. That's wonderful. So we just say monitor your joy level, but we do not want you, to be working and being exhausted. If this is your Sabbath, it's supposed to be delightful and joyful. And so we call it emotionally healthy servanthood, But no, we want people serving. We're the new family of Jesus. We're gathering. There are things to do, but you want to hopefully do things that give you life. And most people are doing ushering, greetering, all that stuff on Sundays, and sound booths and all that. So we've been able to navigate it pretty well, but I think we're careful in just making the proviso. If you are drained because you're doing 3 services, so our sound people now, they're not there 3 services. They switch off. PowerPoint people, and someone might do 2, someone does 1. And so I've seen people modulate like that. But the worship team is probably an exception because they're normally there all the services. But they love it. I mean, and they love rehearsing. They love being together. I mean, and the choir, same thing with the choir. I joined the choir too. It's such a fun place to be, So that's worked. Over here, one more and I'll close it.
My job away from the church has me working 5 days a week, but on call every other week, which means I'm working 7 days a week, up to 13 days before I get a day away from it. How do you fit Sabbath into something like that?
Just guys, and just again, Orthodox Jews have been in this for actually a couple thousand years, and so they've got these things for like emergency workers. People who are doctors are on call and emergency workers, and we need these folks, right? Police officers, and so they have all these like provisions and how. So you've just got to figure it out. So again, let's not be legalistic about it. We have these seasons and certain occupations out of service, to the community, and so you got to be flexible. But you want to take that principle of Sabbath and say, how can I build a rhythm into my life, even with this kind of schedule, which I can't control what's happening to me. So let me close with this. So here's some Sabbath applications. I want to encourage you to reframe your vacations as Sabbaths. Think about, so every time we have a vacation for 2-3 weeks, we think about it in the same principles. Okay, this is a longer sabbatical rest. We're going to stop, rest, delight, contemplate. So we've got to prepare for a long time for Sabbath, especially when you got kids and different needs. And my wife and I sometimes occasionally go our separate ways on Sabbath because we are different people. And what gives her delight is not what gives me delight. Sabbaticals, I'm a big believer in sabbaticals. If you're going to make it long term, that you think through every 7-8 years, 6 to 7, 8 years, you have a 3-month period of sabbatical. Your church will thank you for it. We mentioned it in the church planters yesterday. And then introducing Sabbath to the whole church, you want to be just careful how you do it. You do not want to introduce a new legalism. So we're very light on it in the church. It's in the vocabulary. Obviously our board and our staff, we're very clear. Our leadership is more in it. But is everybody doing Sabbath at New Life? No. I mean, it would take us into a place of, I think, legalism or control. We don't want to get into that. And there's a lot of resources in your notebook. There's resources on like a website with more resources that you can check out. They're all free. You can look at it. And let me just finally invite you to come to this. How do I lead the EHS course and courses in my church? And we're doing live stream events now, 5 a year. And so November 17th is our next one. We mentioned it at the seminar yesterday. But if you want to say, how do I bring this to my church? You want to sign up for that webinar from 10 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, which is 9 to 2:30 your time. And you get 2 or 3 people in a room and come to that, okay? And I encourage you to do it. There's a great personal assessment online. It's free for your people. That in 20 minutes you can find out, am I an emotional infant, child, adolescent, or adult? And about 20 minutes, there'll be, oh boy, And they can either download a PDF or take it online there, and it's all free. It's just a nice little tool to kind of get people introduced to it without freaking them out. So that's it. It's Twitter and Facebook. God bless you, everybody. Thank you. It's been wonderful to be with you.